Evil takes different shapes. For example, nowadays there are lots of people, especially very active on social media, who seem to think that Israel is going too far, that its war of self defense should be carried out in a lighter, more touchy feeling way. 80 years ago, on the day today, the Allies landed on the north shores of France. They were starting their mainland attack of the Nazis. They were freeing mainland Europe. These people probably would argue that the Allies went too far, that they were occupying the north of France and they killed too many innocent Nazis. This is not about numbers or emotional pictures of children and rubble and stories that make us feel uncomfortable. It's about legitimacy, justice, but ultimately it's about morality. Welcome to the reality show. We are today joined by Jonathan Owning and Anders Ingemarsen.
And our focus today on this episode, we're focusing on a debate that has lit up the internet and the social media space. It's a debate that was moderated by Konstantin Kisin of the Triggernometry channel. And the debate was called Israel's War on Hamas is a Just War. And two sides were arguing both for and against. And on the if you look at the thumbnail of this particular episode, starting from the left to the right, I'll just tell you who was on which side, just so you know who we're talking about here, because that's crucial to this. So speaking on the pro-Hamas side was Jake Klein of the Foundation for Economic Freedom. Now we can talk about why that is, and we will do. And also Brianna Joy Gray, who's a former National Press Secretary for Bernie Sanders. And then speaking for the pro-Israeli side were Eli Lake, formerly of Bloomberg and Newsweek, and Michael Moynihan of Fifth Columnist podcast and formerly of Vice News and the Daily Beast. Those were the two sides debating this issue, and it was a heated debate with lots of meat in it, and we can discuss how it went. So let me come to you first, Jonathan, and just get your initial impressions of what you saw of this debate.
I thought it was a meaty debate. I was glad to see it, and I thought in many ways it reminded me of debate between Dr. Peikoff and Dr. Ridpath from 1984 with the socialists in Canada, and that, at least from my eyes, it was a debate that was properly really focused on morality, an attempt at being focused on morality. And as you started off by saying, it's not a question of numbers, but a question of right and wrong and morality. And I was actually really glad to see that. And the characters fit the part in that sense, just the same way that in the socialist debate, I feel like the socialists really looked like socialists. The pro-Hamas side, I guess, particularly the woman who is, I think, a talk show host from The Hill. Is it Claudia Gray?
Brianna Joy Gray. Yeah.
Brianna Joy Gray. She fit the part precisely. And I analyzed a lot of what her history is and what she stands for. And it's truly frightening because, people vote and people are motivated by morality, by what they think is right. And as we get into some of these presentations, we will find it completely horrifying. I know I did. But, she speaks for such a wide, vast, influential majority of young people and even not so young people that we really know the ideas that we're up against here.
Brilliant. Okay. And Anders, what was your initial impressions of what you saw of the debate?
Well, I pretty much echo Jonathan's sentiments here. And I thought as abhorrent as her ideas are and what she's arguing for, she's really smooth and comes across for someone who may not be initiated to these ideas as someone that, that's someone to take seriously. And yeah, that is pretty scary.
Yeah, I was particularly horrified with some of the stuff she said. Well, first of all, the whole debate was following the usual preconception and the usual lines that we heard over and over again. And so some of them were actually debated and debunked on this very channel. But the main thing that annoyed me a bit was that the first 35 minutes of the debate was about talking about numbers. Whose number do we trust? How high are the numbers? But the main point is that numbers do not matter. Of course, you much rather see one dead person than 100 dead people. But the whole point is that this is war. war is the state that you reach when reason is beyond reach. When you're dealing with somebody, you cannot get to the reasonable, peaceful conclusion of a disagreement. And therefore, civilization breaks down and you go to war. And war is by any means the most destructive, most awful thing you can resort to. It's not good for the winning side, it's not good for the losing side. But there are victims in war. So when you go to war, collateral damage will be there. Children and adults and old people will die. However, it's why are you at war? When we talk about innocent people in Gaza, we're talking about the enemy. And the enemy can only be dealt with either by surrendering unconditionally and stopping the hostility, or by being destroyed if they keep fighting. And this is exactly the issue that Israel is facing now.
One of the things they did early on in this debate, or that occupied some of that 35 minutes that Marco's talking about, is going around each panelist and asking for their numbers, as if a set of 4 arbitrary numbers plucked out the air means anything at all. It's a silly way of doing it, to be honest, and it's silly to accept that premise. But of course, I mean, some of the two on the pro-Israel side did challenge that as a concept and talk about the fog of war, etc., which was important. But one of Brianna's very early clangers was on this very subject. She was queen of the clangers throughout this debate, I think. But she said she wouldn't accept that it was a war at all. She used the phrase, "It's not a war at all, given how one-sided it is." And that war is something that applies to equal parties. As if you're a smaller player, a smaller entity, and you attack someone else, that's justified. I mean, it's not like a football match, is it? War is not an even side. But Jonathan?
Well, I mean, there did seem to be some tremendous, just flat out historical ignorance on the side of the advocates for Hamas. The gentleman that she was teamed with, I believe, unless I kind of misunderstood it, basically was claiming that Israel started the 6-day war. You know, that Israel, in effect, that was Israel, you know, they were not the victims of that war, that they started it. And, you know, out of context, you could perhaps make that case, but you're eliminating the whole context that this was a preemptive war to save themselves from a massive army that was being built up. So there's some historical ignorance there that I think plays for a lot of, especially younger people who don't know that, who don't know the history at all. And, you know, she plays into their hand quite a bit, I think, with a kind of very flagrant use of facts. And maybe that's why, you know, I mean, I know why it's useless to battle on numbers, because as you said, you know, Richard, it's not like the numbers really matter. It's about morality. But I'm shocked to see how out of touch with reality, or with morality, but I'm shocked to see how out of touch they are with reality of just the history of what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, and that's the line that the UN is actually peddling. The fact that Israel attacked as a preemptive move, knowing that they were going to be attacked in the first place. But frankly, the historic stuff is, yeah, it's interesting, it's relevant, it's there, but it doesn't really matter right now. This is the situation we're in. October 7 happened for a reason, not because in 1948 the UN decided to create Israel, but because the Arabs refused the existence of Israel, and they've been attacking it since.
But that's what I'm saying. She's like completely even at touch of this. Can I share this quote? I mean, this was Ms. Gray's point. She doesn't even accept that Hamas wants to eliminate Israel. This is her kind of shading, oh, it's really about eliminating the idea of a Jewish state, ending an ethno-national state. I mean, you know, I guess she didn't read the Hamas charter or kind of understand it all. So there just seems to be some ignorance or evasion of the reality of what Hamas and Islamofascism is all about at its core.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anders?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, she obviously lives in her own echo chamber, right? And maybe this is what everybody believes there. Or is she willfully ignoring the facts? Does she really know the truth here, but it just doesn't fit her agenda, and then she is evading that, and this is what she's proclaiming. I mean, so that quote that Jonathan just showed us, it's laughable for anybody who has any concept of what's going on here. Yeah, I mean, she's unfortunately just another voice in a long line of Islamist appeasers. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole argument she was making about the ethno-state, which she kind of dug herself in a hole even more on social media. I mean, the whole point is that Israel is not a state which is being formed because there is a pact with a God that doesn't exist. It's not about religion. It's an issue of morality and legitimacy. A government is given to man because people are free to associate freely and according to their needs and desire. So they tend to form a state, and the state is only legitimate if it allows the individual that form it to live freely. Her point is that Israel is just a state because it's full of Jews. That's not true. The fact that there are 2 million Arabs living in Israel and integrating society, that they are doctors, they are people with proper jobs, and they help the also Israeli society to thrive, unlike the Gaza one. So to argue that Israel is based on a racial component, she even talks about identity politics, is totally false and evil.
Yeah, I mean, she seems to, and I looked at her, Brianna Joy Gray's social media quite a bit. I mean, she's a rising star amongst young intellectuals. She was Bernie Sanders' press secretary. And at every opportunity, she seems not only happy to denigrate the US, but to put this huge moral equivalency between Israel and any other awful Islamic theocracy in the Middle East. And here she writes, why is it that the words Islamic theocracy seem to hold this talismanic weight for you as something is naturally wrong as we should object to, but you don't feel the same way about a Jewish supremacist theocracy? Now, have you guys ever heard of what is the Jewish supremacist theocracy? That's the one that I'm not aware of, but Twitter itself, or X itself, kind of shot back at her very appropriately, like, gee, you remember the time that the IDF blew up a bus in a disco full of people, cheered about it, or hanged gays in the street, reduced women to second-class citizens, child marriage, female gender mutilation, all which is normal throughout all of the Middle East, ex-Israel. So that's what's so befuddling to me is, she's willing to place this not only moral equivalency between Israel and the rest of the Middle East, but actually put Israel below when, as you said, Richard, Israel is the only, forget even democracy, basic rights to respecting country in the entire region. And that's the one she puts down.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking, isn't it? And there's so much we can pick apart from what she said. I want to make sure we talk about some of what her companion said as well, because that's also relevant here. He was Jake Klein from the Foundation of Economic Freedom. Now, you would have hoped that he would have been on our side of the fence, on an objective side of the fence, but no, he was arguing for pro-Hamas as well. And one of the things that was noticeable about his stance was some of the things he was saying that just float in the air and always exist as statements which are unfounded. He said, October the 7th should never happen again. It was a tragedy. Now, this is when you use tragedy with no actors, no instigators, no actual aggressors. It's as if a tragedy happened, like a natural catastrophe. It didn't happen. It was intent that there was tragedy. That was the aim of Hamas in causing it. And of course, he floats out phrases like, I've got no problem with terrorists and murderers being taken out. And then, of course, makes a moral equivalence between the government of Netanyahu also containing terrorists and murderers. But just to say things like, I hate Hamas, I want to get rid of Hamas. Well, the only way to get rid of Hamas is via war. isn't it? It's via the annihilation of their facilities, the military bases, all of their infrastructure that enables them to continue war, and the fact that they run the government of Gaza. And unless you can finish the two of them in both ways, then you're not going to see the end of Hamas. But of course, that's not what he wants. He wants this to be done with some mythical method that allows zero casualties.
He seemed to me like a kind of a, I'm not an expert in Dr. Peikoff's dim, but like a D, kind of a disintegration. And the other one, Miss Gray, seemed much more like an integration. You know, she has it all integrated into a real, you know, she's Harvard Law, Harvard undergrad. This is a smart woman. I mean, given what we're seeing at Harvard, it's not surprising she went there, probably 10, 12 years ago. So, you know, this is a woman of those ideas, she's not a libertarian by any means. She's really integrated with this vehemently collectivist, I believe racist, and anti-American ideology.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned before her detachment from reality. She says something like, Muslims and Jews lived in peace before 1948. Have you ever heard about the Muftis? The Arabs were backing Hitler because Hitler was committing a genocide against the Jews. You know, nobody ever argues that the Ottoman Empire occupied Palestine. First of all, because Palestine didn't exist. And second, because they weren't Jews, they were Muslims. So that was fine. The fact that the Ottomans lost the First War and the area became British to administer, and the British decided to set up a state there, promised a state to the Jews. But then the Second World War comes, and the Arabs back again, they lose in sight. And what happens? The UN, the very institution who's funding Gaza and the promotion of Jewish hate through UNRWA, all the digging of tunnels and the smuggling of weapons, the UN itself set up Israel as a state, and it's still not good enough. The Arabs decide to attack it because they don't want it. They don't want the Jews. They tend to believe the Arabs, every time that Hamas provides numbers, they are unquestioned. But when it comes to believing the charter, the statement that they made, you know, that's fiction, apparently. This kind of double standard, how can they have those two competing thoughts in their mind and still be rational, functioning? I don't understand that. But Anders, is there any particular points that kind of sticks in your throat?
Well, you know, I actually wanted to go back and just comment on what or was it Richard, who said that you know, Hamas won't go away until they have been utterly destroyed. And I think there's even more to it than that. You basically have to defeat Islamic totalitarianism or Islamism as such, the radical views of Islam, because and I actually listened to many of your viewers are probably familiar with Yaron Brook's show, and on Tuesday 6/4 he actually gave a really good overview of Hamas, and to a point where I, for the first time, realized how deeply ingrained this is, and that it cannot end until they have been thoroughly defeated, not only in practice but in theory and the ideology behind this thing. Because an Israel, a Jewish state, or just not even Jewish, but the state of Israel in that part of the world is an effrontery to Islam. And if it's not Hamas, you know, it will be somebody else. And that's why really what needs to be destroyed here is really the ideology.
Yeah. That was one of the points that the pro-Israel side did make quite well, I thought, at one point. They talked about how that it's the people corrupted by the corrupt ideology, and that Islamism is dangerously inculcated in the children. And we know how the UNRWA schools and stuff are all in their textbooks, etc., making sure that that kids are taught to hate Jews from a young age. Jonathan.
Yeah. Well, and just get this presentation of Israel, because my sense is most people probably haven't been to Israel. A lot of people probably haven't been to Israel. So this presentation by these leftists, these Hamas supporters, as Israel as this oppressive, racist, militaristic, totalitarian society. I've been there 3 times. It's modern. It's beautiful. It felt to me very much like Toronto or a modern American city, full of incredible artwork and places to explore where everyone was welcome. And we've talked about on this channel, I don't know what percentage of Israeli residents are American, or are not only American, but Arab, but many of them, huge percentages of them, with goods and services. And there's some objectivist favorites there, Boaz Ender from the Ayn Rand Center Israel, and Dr. Brooke with New Textbook of Americanism. But just it's straight out invasion to me to present Israel as this oppressive totalitarian state and glamorize the Palestinian state, where all of these Americans, certainly if they're most likely, I think, people of color or of a different religion or of a different sexual ethnicity, would be thrown off a building or hung at this pike. I mean, only evasion can believe it. And if you don't believe that that's the nature of Hamas, check out the documentary Nova, which was released, and I think it's for free on YouTube. This is the documentary about the Nova Music Festival, and you see these wonderful young Israeli kids dancing and having a party at a festival, and 25 minutes later, this group of absolute, you'd say animals, but animals don't do this. Absolute sadistic murderers come in and butcher them, and
and
they
one
take the opposite side. Which I don't
absolutely. One of the things I've noticed on the Nova Festival particularly is, have you noticed how lately in all of the commentary, how the paragliders, the armed paragliders, are not mentioned anymore? How people flying over en masse with weapons in their hands to kill everyone they see the second they land, and they land at the Nova Festival. And yet, because that is such an obvious example of what Hamas is and how killing is its aim, it's notable how that's erased from the discussion of October 7th, and of course why we're at the point we are now. But I wanted to get to a couple of our super chats. So thank you very much to PC for your super chat. He points out that Hamas supporters are mostly woke leftists. And we have certainly seen that. We've certainly seen how the two sides of Islamists and the leftists tend to link together with wokeism under the banner of some colonialism or some botched ideology that they try and combine together.
And to go back to one of the points that Jonathan was making, I mean, the supporters of the so-called Palestinians, what are they actually supporting? They're supporting a theocracy. It's a Islamic-backed theocracy, i.e. a place where you haven't got any rights because you are enslaved to a fake god or its priest, the person who pretends to talk on behalf of this god. So all our friends, the queers of Palestine, they've probably never been to a gay pride in Gaza, but they will have probably been to Tel Aviv, because Tel Aviv in Israel is an open place. It's a place that guarantees thriving and freedom for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, if you were drowned in a ship, if you were on a sinking ship and you could, swim to 2 islands. One was Israel, one was the Gaza Strip. I mean, where would you, especially if you were a minority, want to swim? I mean, where would you, and some of these other acts by these American Hamas supporters, I think, are just so unbelievably ugly. I mean, this is making the headlines now that Breonna Joy Gray, and I've seen it, you can go look at the video, she's interviewing the sister of a Hamas hostage, and from my eyes, I agree, just kind of rolls her eyes in a very casual, crass way when this woman is describing, the horrors of her sister being kidnapped. And that's the reality. And the fact that she's from Harvard, this isn't some like out there intellectual who no one's ever heard of. These are mainstream ideas that are influencing young people who will be tomorrow's leaders and support today. So that's what's so disconcerting, is instead of 100-year-old Brooks and Nikos Spyrakopoulos and Marco and Richards and Alex Epstein, we've got Brianna Joy Gray and all of her ilk who are making roads with young people the world over.
Yeah, she clearly hasn't got a poker face. You can see when she's annoyed or when she's not agree with you. She kind of makes you understand. Anders, earlier on you were mentioning about the Islamic threat behind it, the ideology that actually fires up these kind of people. Have you seen the clips when she talks about the intrinsic nature of Islamic theocracy? She's making a. Did you see that clip?
That one I missed. Sorry.
Effectively, she's talking to somebody, and they're discussing. The guy challenges her, and he says, "Well, it's a Islamic theocracy, and what's wrong with theocracy?" Well, it's theocracy. Theocracy is actually intrinsically evil because, as I said earlier on, puts the will of a god in front of the rights of the individual. So it doesn't matter if it's a Islamic theocracy, Jewish theocracy, Christian theocracy. That's not a legitimate way of having a government. But what other parts of the debate do you think was particularly pernicious?
Well, I must say that you mentioned it in passing, Jake Klein, who, and it was, so disappointing to me that he is from the Foundation of Economic Education, which I have, for being a non-objectivist organization, I think they're doing good work. So I would really like to find out a little bit more about how that gels with what they stand for. And so that was a huge disappointment. Now, he didn't perform very well, I think, as someone mentioned initially during the debate, and showed some really, really factual gaps in his understanding, 1948 war, etc., etc. So I don't know if they threw him in there because they couldn't find anybody else, or but that was almost a shocker to me, that an FE representative would be in there representing Hamas. But maybe I don't know enough about FE.
Sure, yeah, it is always disappointing, isn't it, when people you feel should be on your side and should understand the basis of economic freedom and where that comes from, and therefore ought to be able to translate why individual freedom means not being murdered by people who initiate force against you. It would seem to be an elementary link between the two. But yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the things that he said that Israel is keen to avoid making peace with its neighbors. Really? Its neighbors seem keen to avoid making peace with Israel, as far as I can see, and those paragliders are a key example of it. But we also have a super chat I should mention from Bonnie. So thank you, Bonnie, a regular supporter of the show. We appreciate that.
Yeah, again, with all of their education and evaluation, the take from, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, the captured Hamas operative who talked very freely about raping a woman with his father and then the uncle, and then they just slit her throat. Like, this is the side in which these people are on. They're on their side. And the Stop Anti-Semitism website, which I do follow and track quite a bit, actually picked Gray as her the anti-Semitic of the week for a couple of weeks or months ago. And she has this history of, for example, she perpetuated the falsehood that Israel blocked the food to Gaza and that Israel's done all these terrible things. She perpetuates all these not just anti-Israel, but anti-Semitic stereotypes over and over again. And what's so sobering is that she isn't seen as this Lyndon LaRouche type fringe person. She is extraordinarily influential, especially with young people. And knowing that ideas move the world, she's moving the debate in the wrong direction.
Yeah, one of the statements she made within the debate was she argued that Jews get more aid despite being more affluent, and assumed that this means aid from the US or assistance from the financial assistance from the US, and she was clearly hinting that there was some sort of conspiracy theory that because they were more affluent, they were getting that aid, or of course utterly ignoring the fact that the whole world has piled gazillions of dollars into the Palestinians via UNRWA and the UN, that has also, of course, been farmed off by the Hamas leadership, who've pocketed it for themselves, even though we would not want to see all that aid in the first place.
But when she says, we started by asking why the Hamas supporters are winning the debate, and is it kind of boiled down to the roots of altruism, where all she has to do is say Hamas only killed 1,100 people and Israel has killed 20,000 people. So how can you say, is it just that simple appeal to numbers? Is that why they're winning? And I don't know if our audience actually agrees.
I think it's partly that, and I think it's partly how the debate ends up getting framed. And at the beginning half of it, they came across something which I think was key to understanding that, which was making some distinction, or at least arguing some distinction, between whether it's a just war and whether it's being fought in a just manner. And now this strikes me as a classic theory-practice dichotomy. This strikes me as yes, it's a just war because Israel should be defending itself. And then people make some separate analysis of how Israel should defend itself, as if it can mythically pick the only Hamas terrorists hiding under schools, in hospitals, with their weaponry, and simply annihilate them, and that will solve the problem. But the two go together. You have to fight the war totally, and you have to tackle the entire ideology, and you have to defeat Hamas. And this argument about whether Hamas is men only, or whether it's also women, what children is, how that's defined in the first place, and when children are taught to hate Jews and to bear arms and to carry weaponry and to be decoys and attacks in various places, then it becomes much more, much less clear, much less obvious that using the word children tries to pretend to be. But certainly, go ahead.
No, please.
But so I was just going to recap that certainly that distinction between whether it's a just war and how you fight it, as if those are two utterly different things, when in order to end the war quickly, you do need to defeat the enemy quickly. And this method that Israel is using and has been using since October the 7th has been, because of altruism, has only extended the nature of the war, cost more IDF soldiers, and of course, ultimately not achieved the victory that it should have done by not being as firm and thorough as that principle that they were responding to demands.
Yeah, I would say if there's one sentence that encapsulates Brianna Gray, it's hatred of the good for being the good. And I mean, it's not only in her words, but as you said, it's in her demeanor. You can almost see the hatred there. It's astounding.
The guy in I believe from Commentary Magazine, who's on the pro-Israel side, I thought had a great line. He said something to the effect of, Israel should fight and win the war, and then they should be given a Nobel Peace Prize for it. And I was like, I don't idealize the Nobel Peace Prize, but I thought, hell yeah, exactly right. Kill enough people that they are forced to kill, or do what it has to do to end the conflict, to finish the war so that there are no more subsequent attacks. And, when asked what Israel should have done after October 7th, Brianna Joy Gray, her response was something to the effect of make reparations, give them the right of return, and build infrastructure for the communities. So, she sees them as fundamentally guilty, and the Palestinians is fundamentally just. And that's why, Mark and Richard, to your point, the hang gliders coming in with weapons and all the butchery that went on and the rape and the kidnapping that goes on to this day is completely overlooked.
Yeah. Her line about that, when asked what Israel, when she was really pushed to answer what Israel should have done after October the 7th, was essentially she said, what Palestinians want should define what Israel should have done after October the 7th. So that's how you deal with terrorists, is it? You give them whatever they asked for. I mean, the morality there is atrocious. It's staggering, to be honest.
Well, she back in October, she also claimed that there was no babies killed or abused by Hamas. She denied any occurrence of rape, stating that it was all fabricated. So, there's a history of just evasion or malicious misrepresentation against the facts of reality.
Yeah. They seem to have taken a side, and anything that shows the opposite, it's not valid in their head. They don't see the facts if they are presented by one side rather than their side, and that's part of the problem. They see the world as tribes fighting against each other, and they have the need to be part of a tribe, of course, because they don't understand what morality is. They don't bother to discover how you reach it. Of course, Ayn Rand does a perfectly scientific and logic explanation of where morality comes from, what does it mean, and why do we need it. I urge anyone to read the Objectivist Ethics, which is a beautifully clear, it's such a clear language. It feels like reading a narrative, a book, rather than, it's fairly short, it's a few pages, but the way she writes, it's not academic language. It's just so obvious. At the end of it, it's like, of course. But people seem to always want this kind of aura of mysticism. If things are too straightforward, they don't believe them. And that's part of the problem.
And they always seem to assume that morality must be based on a religious basis. And that essay is what clearly lays out where religion is not necessary for morality. In fact, reason is the opposite. Anders?
Yeah, it's. I'm looking for something positive to say, and it's really tough to find it when you have watched a debate like this. Yeah, I think there were some good points, as Jonathan pointed out, that the good side pointed out. But I'm wondering what's the way forward here. Yeah, I know they're in the majority, but there are a lot of people out there who are the silent majority who are pro-Israel. We see that from the polls, and there are a lot of people who are doing the good work as well. But how do we break through to these people who are listening to Brianna Gray? And because I think there are a lot of them there who are. It's possible to persuade them if you provide them with the right arguments. And I don't know. I missed the part of the debate where they took the vote afterwards, or did they even get to that? So that did the debate change the perception in the audience at all?
Yes, at the very end, I think the 3% increase in the number of people who are pro-Israel. So,
yeah, and it was an overwhelming. For the audience, they were overwhelmingly in favor of Israel from the beginning. I think there were over 100 that were on the pro-Israel side, and around 20 on the pro-Hamas side, and around 25 unknowns was the conclusion of the debate.
It seemed
so 3% changed their mind, so that was within the margin of error, pretty much then. So, yeah, okay.
Well, it did seem to annoy the Hamas proponents. I don't know if you guys saw this headline, but apparently after the debate was over, Brianna Joy Gray said, quote, "It's disgusting. I hope someone drops a bomb on this entire building." And this was confirmed by a Fox News analyst as well, whose name is escaping me for a moment here. But what do you guys make of that? I mean, you want to take that as kind of a rhetorical flourish, or does that mean anything to you? When you, even if you feel like you've lost the debate, is that going to be your response?
That's staggering, especially because during the very debate, they were actually arguing that Israel is not careful enough about not about reducing the civilian casualty, the collateral damage. And of course, we all know that if you do that, all you actually end up doing is sacrifice your own side, your own young soldier, in order to save some of the Hamas supporters on the other side. And she even admitted that everything in Gaza is Hamas, because the government is Hamas, the health service is Hamas, schools are Hamas. So she was making the point that Israel is indiscriminately hitting civilians, and then she comes up with this one. But even if she didn't mean it as such, probably she didn't. It was just a stupid statement. But even if you don't mean it, how can you have a debate? Again, goes back to what I was saying earlier. How can you keep those two thoughts in your head? Israel is bad, but you are happy to bomb something. I mean, or even suggest it.
But I think she meant it. Now, in this day and age of Twitter, she has a chance to put it in print immediately, as that emotion is kind of bubbling up in her brain, and I think that's just another expression of the emotionalist hatred of the good that is basically driving her entire existence.
And when people are outside of their comfort zone, outside of their own collective, particularly people on the left with her outlook on life, as soon as they're not surrounded by people occupying the same ideological space as them, then they do become aggressive, and you see that repeatedly. So it's no wonder she's on the pro-Hamas side when she's essentially advocating for pro-Hamas style responses to debate.
Yeah, she probably sees herself as a victim as well, just like the entire Palestinian people and Gazans and such. So she identifies with them on some level.
Yeah. She actually got into it a little bit with one of the, I guess, the moderator, Konstantin Kisin. Forgive me if I'm Kisin. So this was the back and forth on Twitter. Brianna Joy Gray said, "This is from the quote neutral moderator of a debate on Israel's genocide in Gaza, you simply cannot argue with racists." And Konstantin wrote back, and I thought this was a great comeback. "No one cares about your race, Brianna. This isn't Harvard," right? Because, to your point, Anders, you just get the sense that this is very much someone who has been in that very much leftist academic world. She was, I'm sure, as I said, a star at Harvard 10, 12 years ago. And this is why it makes me think of Dr. Peikoff's line from even more than 10 or 12 years ago when he said that the biggest dangers to risk, the biggest risks to students at universities is drug addiction, depression, and going to class. Because Brianna Joy Gray has been well taught. I mean, she's really well taught in all of these ideas, sees herself as the victim in every turn, sees race and collectivism at every turn, and spews it back out to a willing audience that gobbles it up.
Yeah, and of course, in today's world, if you are a victim, you have a more advantage over anyone else, because, of course, you are suffering. Therefore, altruism said you should be put ahead of everything else. But something that these do-gooders, people-loving, peace-loving people never actually mention are the hostages. The nearly 200 people that were taken from their homes on October 7th, and some of which, if they're still alive, are held by Hamas right now. The same people in Gaza who are supposed to be the endless victims, the same people who should have the benefit of being forever refugees and forever held by the international community, because in their minds, people are so unable to deal with their own matters, to deal with their own life, to be productive on their own, that they need to have the status where somebody else helps them. So even the idea that the Gazan society cannot be a functioning society, a civilized society, is a racist idea in itself. But they push this kind of ideas as well. And the whole thing, even one of the good things of the debate was that at the end, the moderator asked everyone what Israel should have done, rather than just being on the negative and debate things. But some of the answers, especially from the Parama side, was ridiculous. As Jonathan mentioned, her answer was they should have the right to return. Well, what do you mean right to return? Not everyone was displaced. Some people were displaced because, of course, it was a massive logistical thing that the UN embarked on when they created a brand new state. But only a few people, hundreds, thousands, a few thousands of people are still around, probably from 76 years ago, probably hundreds of them. So yeah, perhaps they should have the right to return, but everybody else is just born somewhere else. So even that right to return, first of all, it's not a right, it's just, a shopping list kind of thing. But
I think some of the answers on the pro-Israel side were quite good on that point. Firstly, they talked about don't start wars, lose wars, and then claim we are the victims after you've lost a war, which it's been the standard MO for the side for decades, absolutely. And also, he talked about the fact that you're only going to see a Palestinian leader emerge who can, recognize the change once the ideology is defeated, once Hamas is utterly defeated, and you have no chance of seeing any form of Palestinian leader emerge who could be dealt with until they could recognize that Hamas has been thoroughly defeated, and that this technique of terrorism and force and taking hostages will not gain you results. Because at the moment, it's the concession to that methodology as much as the ideology, which is what is perpetuating this conflict across so many decades.
If we carry on, Jonathan.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, her popularity, her influence is what is sobering. I think moving forward, we've covered for how many months now the protests on college campuses, extraordinarily violent, destructive, and how it's the professors who indoctrinate young people with these ideas and cheer them on when they put them into practice. And you look at Miss Gray's resume, the fact that she spent time in Saudi Arabia and Kenya growing up is less of interest to me than her education at Harvard and Harvard Law School. And what makes me so sad, I think, about the future is think about the influence of a young person, a sharp young person. We've used Martin Anderson quite a bit. Martin Anderson was an associate of Ayn Rand's, I think a student of Ayn Rand's, and ultimately as a young, I don't think the term influencer was alive back then, but a young person in the Nixon administration got rid of the draft, was able to abolish the draft here in the United States, which certainly is an amazing benefit to every American, especially those young people now who are protesting against Israel. So the influence of these young minds, it's ideas that move the world. And it's why I think it's so important that we have supporters of the Ayn Rand Center UK to help us get the right ideas out to the young minds that are listening all over the world.
Yeah. And one of those right ideas is definitely concerns not submitting to compromise and making sure that your principles are held firmly. And I think that was something that was brought out by, to be honest, the host in this debate, because he made the point that these maximalist positions are unattainable, and that is there any agreement that gets us to stop the fighting? And let me come to you, Anders. What do you think about this point that Rand has made many times about principles and compromise?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have said already from the beginning of this war that, morality is on the side of Israel, and they should have ended this war early, within a couple of months or something, and yeah, people would have been outraged, but by now that whole thing would have died down, and people would have been back to school. So you can see the compromise on the side of Israel, and vis-a-vis the United States, the international community internally in Israel, where there are factions who are obviously arguing for different approaches to this war, especially with the hostages. And yes, it's terrible with the hostages that are still alive, and of course the families want them to be freed, but they should unfortunately have been seen as lost, as dead from the get-go, and then just eradicate Hamas. That would have been the principled approach to this, and instead we're mired in compromise, and this is still going on when it should have been over a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And the title of this episode, or one of the titles we're using, is Why Hamas Supporters Are Winning the Debate. And I think one of the things that Brianna brought out was one of the things she exposed as being a shallow argument, but that is accepted by too many people, is that she has this belief that this region can be just like America if you allowed 7 million Palestinians to return to the state of Israel and have what she described as a one-state solution. I mean, how far off is that from being remotely practical, achievable, or even desirable, given the ideologies that we're talking about? Jonathan.
Yeah. I mean, pretty. And by what right? By what right? I just think there's a kind of seems to be a thread running through so much of the advocates for Hamas's perspective is, hey, we did some bad things. Israel did some bad things. Let bygones be bygones, and not just erase history, but just evade it altogether. The war, I think, needs to be ideological more than anything, which is why we do what we do. But it's just, as I said, it's so disconcerting to see the perspectives. And I encourage all of our audience to watch not only debate, but watch, as I have in this last week, this Nova Music Festival documentary. You don't have to be an expert in history of the Middle East or what the Nakba is or what happened was the 6-Day War. You don't have to be an expert in this. Just watch these young modern kids, seemingly rights respecting, hanging out, having fun at a music festival, and these unbelievable butchers come in and say, well, what should they have done as a result? Brianna says that they should have said, oh, well, come on in, more of you. Everyone come on in. And, it's like when you're faced with someone paragliding in to slit your throat, what are you supposed to do? Just sit down and invite him to go to it? I mean, Anders, you started by saying, this is the hatred of the good for being the good. Israel is the good. And Hamas, the Palestinians, are the bad. And it's that ideology that needs to be understood. And until it is, I think this is a vicious, murderous cycle that goes on and on.
Yeah.
If Hamas really wanted the United States of Palestine, as Brianna Gray was claiming in her tweet there, ridiculous as it is, but I mean, Israel is the closest there is to the United States of the Middle East. So there you go. And there are 2 million Arabs living there today. And guess what? None of them want to leave, and definitely not leave to go to live on the West Bank or in Gaza. And historically, we had a lot of immigration, or not immigration, but, people from Gaza and West Bank working in Israel on a daily basis. And, so Israel is providing immense value to the region, to anybody who wants life and pursue their happiness. And the Brianna Grays of the world are obviously totally ignorant.
It's what Rand said, in the Donahue interview, which you can Google Ayn Rand Middle East in YouTube. This will come up probably first. Ayn Rand presented Israel as the modern, rights-respecting, technologically advanced democracy, bringing, the Western world to the Middle East, described the Arabs as the barbarous savages. That was 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, and it has not changed, at all. And as I said, I've been to Israel 3 times. It's a wondrous, productive, exciting place in which you feel comfortable walking down the street as a single person, as a single woman, as a, as an American. I mean, this is a place that anyone, in my experience, feels tremendously welcome. I don't think you can say the same thing about the West Bank. I don't think you can say the same thing about Gaza or Palestine, that, we could just walk down the street, with our gay pride flag shirt on or whatever you want to be wearing and feel like people are going to respect my rights. They will not. And that's why Israel should be supported and commended, and not the other way around.
Yeah. There's no doubt that if you're a decent person, if you love life, you have to support Israel. Again, not because the God of the Jews is better than Allah. It's because the state of Israel is founded as a melting pot of people who love life, who respect rights. Ignore the religious stuff. Unfortunately, religion is still, in 2024, is still a dominant ideology. But that's all made up. What really matters is when a state protects you from violence. And Israel should be a bit more proactive in protecting its own citizens. It's, again, better than all the other nations around it, but it's not ideal either. So it's not about Israel as such. It's about what Israel represents. Well, we're running out of time here.
We do have one more super chat, which I should mention, which is from Mark Goodkin, who says, "Good show. Thank you very much, Mark. We appreciate that, absolutely." One thing we should mention is that the Daily Objective today is at an unusual time. Normally it's just before this show, but today it's going out at 7:30 p.m. So half an hour after we wrap up here in a few moments' time. So do make sure you stick around for that as well.
Yeah. So before we leave, Jonathan, is there anything you want to advertise or remind people?
Especially as we did see your dog in the background making an appearance at a couple of points.
Well, quickly want to thank not only our supporters, but our YouTube members like El Rito, Star Hopper, Jesse Reinbach, who else? Bonnie Bertrand, so many others who support us just with a couple of pounds a month on YouTube. It really helps us keep the lights on. We bring you more original programming inspired by objectivism than any other outfit, with some of the smartest minds in the movement. So thanks to all of those who support, including, if I could read this, probably the last one, from Larchietto, who says, sadly, 60 years of Marxist anthropology has finally borne fruit, sour fruit. And I certainly would agree. And for a better ideology, the book, A New Textbook of Americanism, written by Ayn Rand in part, is available on Amazon, which presents a moral case for America and the Western world.
Yeah. Anders?
Yeah, you can find my book, Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right, anywhere on Amazon, audio, paperback, or Kindle version. And it's available on Amazon outlets around the world. And I'm also on Substack, andersingemarson.substack.com.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And don't forget, folks, the Daily Objective is in half an hour on this channel. So stick around for that, and we'll see you there. Thanks very much.
And tomorrow we're back with the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.